Good evening. This is Hailey Gallant Rice. I'm an attorney with Consumer Law Group, LLC, and I will be presenting this evening's webinar on understanding credit reports. Before we get started, I'd just like to go over the agenda for this evening's webinar. We're going to begin with some basic principles concerning credit reports. We'll discuss what it is to be a credit reporting agency, what a credit score means and how that's determined. Following that, we will go over how to obtain a copy of your credit report via the annualcreditreport.com website. And then once you've obtained a copy of your credit report, I'm going to give you some of my best tips as to what to look for on a credit report and how it is that a consumer should review that. I'll also be showing you some sample credit reports online from Experian and TransUnion, as well as a link to an informational video on how to access an Equifax credit report and tips on how to review that as well. After we've gone through how to read a credit report, we'll discuss what would be necessary in order to conduct a credit report dispute. And then finally, we'll close out the webinar with tips for good credit, either maintaining or improving a score. And then there will be time for questions and as well as my contact information for individuals wishing to contact me. So first I'd like to start off with a discussion of what exactly a consumer reporting agency is. I'll be referring to that in this webinar as a CRA. And a CRA is a company that collects information on consumers. And they take that information and they sell it to third parties, which are also known as creditors. And the creditors are interested in purchasing these reports because it helps them make financial decisions about whether or not to lend money to consumers. There are three major credit reporting agencies, which many of you probably know. The first is Experian, the second is Equifax, and the third is TransUnion. And all of these CRAs function in slightly different ways in terms of the type of information that they collect and the manner in which they present it, but the fundamental concept is the same. They do gather information from public records as well as information that is provided to them by creditors concerning existing accounts, and they compile all of that information and they market it for crediting decisions. There are other types of CRAs as well that differ a little bit, and the first would be an employment verification company. And you've probably heard of these if you've ever applied for a job at a large company. ADP, which stands for Automatic Data Processing, is one company that runs a fairly large employment verification process. There's also InVerify and eVerify. And these CRAs focus less on your credit history and more on the type of information that employers might be interested in when they're looking at your employment application. So they would collect information concerning your criminal history, potentially your income, and slightly different information about your credit history, whether there's any judgments against you, and the type of information that would tend to establish whether you're someone that can be trusted with financially sensitive information. And employers will use these to consider whether they would like to bring you on as an employee. The second type of CRA are check guarantee services, and the most popular is Check Systems. There are other smaller organizations out there, but Check Systems is the primary provider. And the information that Check Systems gathers is information concerning banking fraud, unpaid overdraft fees, and it's primarily used by banks and check cashing services to determine whether you are eligible to open an account. If a particular consumer has a history of check fraud or large sums of overdraft fees, usually a bank will not be interested in opening an account with that consumer because there's a risk that the same type of situation would happen again and the bank would be responsible for covering those overdraft fees. So many consumers are actually unaware of check systems, and they become aware in the instance where they have a problem. So it is very important for consumers to be aware of their check systems report, and I will go over down the line a little bit about how to access that information. But just being aware that it exists and being aware of the information that's on it will certainly make it easier to open a new bank account down the line. So next we'll be discussing what is on your credit report, and in my experience there are some very common misconceptions about what is and isn't on a credit report. So first we'll go over what is on your credit report. And the first item that most creditors will see when reviewing it is your identifying information. This includes your Social Security number, which is usually redacted except for the last 4 digits when a creditor is reviewing it, but it may not be. There's also your full name and any other names that you've been known by. If you were married, it may include your maiden name. If you changed your name pursuant to a court order, it should include both your former and your current names. It will also include your current address and any other addresses that have been associated with you previously. Your phone number and previous phone numbers may also appear. And if you've worked for an employer that complies with, that is required to comply with new hire reporting, your employment history to a certain degree may also appear there, in that the credit reporting agency would obtain information from the new hire reporting system and associate that with your name. So some of your jobs may be on there. The most important part of your credit report, however, and what is the largest part, is a list of your creditors. And this would include both your current and past due accounts. It includes accounts that are currently open and active, and it includes certain accounts that have been closed either by you or by the credit grantor. The list of accounts and creditors would include the type of account as well, the age, which would be specified by the date that it was opened. It would also include the current balance, and on some credit reports the balance history is also available, and I will show that to you in a bit, and as well as your payment history. So on most credit reports, if you were more than 30 days late on any given month, that would show up on the payment history. Even though you may have caught up and gotten current again, the past due status would still remain. Other information that is on your credit report are public records, and that includes any civil judgments that may have been obtained against you in court by creditors if you were sued in connection with a debt. It might also include any liens on your home, any bankruptcy if you filed either Chapter 7, Chapter 11, or Chapter 13. And then finally, one very important thing that many consumers are not aware of is the contact information for the Consumer Reporting Agency. And as we'll see later on in the presentation, this is important in case it is necessary to file a dispute. Usually on the last page of your credit report, you will see the name, telephone number, and address of the Consumer Reporting Agency and directions as to how to contact them. There will also usually be a summary of the consumer's rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which will also be important in the event that a dispute is necessary, and we'll discuss that in more detail later. Obviously, there are a lot of things that are not on a consumer credit report, but here are some of the most common misconceptions. Your income is not reported on your credit report. Also, your numeric credit score, and in just a moment we'll discuss the difference between a credit report and a credit score. But in terms of just obtaining a pure copy of your credit report, that numeric score, whether it's a 720 or an 800 or a 560, that will not be on your credit report. That's something separate. And then finally, your bank account information. Obviously, there are some exceptions to that, like we just discussed with check systems. That focuses more on banking account history, so that's something where, you know, overdraft fees and other check-related situations may show up. But when we're discussing the 3 main credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, your bank account information is not going to show up on that. So this brings us into the next topic, which is what is a credit score? And that is a system that is used by creditors, and it helps them determine whether or not you should be extended credit. Essentially, a numeric score is assigned to you and your credit history, and that helps them assess the risk. Credit scores are based on the timeliness in which you pay your bills, the number, the age, and the type of account that you have. And by type of account, I mean a mortgage account versus a credit card account versus a student loan account. Those all have different values. And finally, the balance of your account relative to their limits. So if you have a credit card with a $10,000 limit and you are using $9,000 of that credit, that may lower your credit score as opposed to a situation where you would only be using $2,000 of that $10,000 limit. Now, these are some guidelines from the credit reporting agencies themselves on how to interpret a credit score. And the first figure here shows the relative weight of the items against each other. So the most important thing in determining your credit score is your payment history. The second most important thing is the amount owed. So the total value of all of your debts together is going to be a factor to your credit score. And that's also going to take into consideration the amount owed relative to the total amount of credit that you have available to you. So if you have several credit cards with different limits, that's all going to be added up to determine one total limit, and then all of your balances of those credit cards would be added up to determine a total balance, and those would be compared against each other. The third most important factor is the length of your credit history. So individuals that have been in the credit files for 10, 15, 20 years are going to have a slightly better credit score in many situations than individuals that are just starting out and really only have their first credit card. The fourth most important factor is new credit. Individuals that have recently opened several different new accounts obviously are going to have a set of obligations that are going to change their circumstances a bit. So someone who has had a relatively strong payment history for several years and then opens up $25,000 in new credit, that's going to weigh against their favorable payment history in a bit, because to a creditor it would appear that, you know, these new obligations may make it more difficult for the individual to pay their accounts on time. So if there's a lot of new credit there, that is something that could work against you on a credit score. And then finally, the last thing is the type of credit used. And this speaks more to the issue of credit cards versus things like mortgages and student loans. And a credit card is something that we call revolving debt, in that, you know, there's a set credit limit and the individual can make a lot of charges and then can pay those charges off, and then the credit limit is available to them once again. So the credit amount that's available and the amount of credit that's used is constantly changing, and that makes it a revolving account. Something like a mortgage account or a student loan is more fixed in that the individual borrows that loan at a certain amount and then makes payment to it, and they're not allowed to borrow on a line of credit again in that account. So individuals that have more credit cards and revolving debt may see lower credit scores than individuals that have lots of fixed accounts like mortgages and student loans. And the second figure is a guideline as to, you know, what constitutes a good credit score. 800 and over is considered excellent. 850 is the highest possible credit score, and 300 is the lowest possible credit score. So individuals that are falling below 600 are considered to be in the very poor to poor range. 650 to 699 is fair to good, and slightly over 699 seems to be about the average credit score these days. So if you're somewhere in that range, you're falling within the middle range of American credit scores. Anything over 700 is considered to be good and will usually allow a consumer to see lower interest rates and more favorable lending from consumers. So the next topic is obtaining a copy of your free credit report. And the site that we recommend to all of our clients is annualcreditreport.com. And the federal law establishes that you have a right to receive one free copy of each of your 3 credit reports once every 12 months. So you're allowed one copy of your Experian, one copy of your TransUnion, and one copy of your Equifax report in every 12-month cycle. Some consumers choose to obtain them all at once. Some spread them out throughout the year. The information contained on each report is a little bit different. So there are pros and cons to obtaining them all at once and spreading them out, but however you choose to do it, you get one every 12 months. At annualcreditreport.com, there are instructions for how to obtain a copy of your credit report. Obviously, the fastest and easiest way to do it is to request it right there online. As soon as you've answered the questions and made the request, a copy of your credit report is readily available to you, and you're able to download it in PDF form and save it to your computer or print it out. If you're not comfortable requesting it online, you can also request it by a written form, and that form is available on the website. You print it off, fill it out, and mail it in. And if you're not comfortable with that, you can also request a copy by phone, and if you call the number on the site, you're able to enter in a bunch of information about yourself on an automated prompting system, and once you've done all of that, you'll be able to get a copy by mail. It usually takes about 7 to 10 days. There are a lot of other quote free credit report websites out there. You've probably seen the ads on television about these. We recommend that consumers stay away from these, and the reason for that is that most of these alleged free credit report websites actually make you put in a credit card in order to receive a copy of your free report. And most commonly, this is for a trial for a free credit monitoring service. And what happens is that the consumer puts in the credit card, gets the free credit report, and then kind of forgets about it. Usually about a month later, they'll start seeing this recurring monthly charge for this credit monitoring service. Some people like it. They think that it's useful, but most people are taken by surprise and they don't really need it, and they're surprised by this money coming out of their bank account. So we recommend that people just forget about those other free credit report websites, cut through the red tape, and just go to annualcreditreport.com. You'll never be required to put in any credit card information for that site. Another situation when consumers may be entitled to a free copy of their credit report is if they're denied credit. Some of us may have received letters in the mail sometimes after applying for a credit card or a loan at a bank, and those letters will explain that the individual was not able to open the account for a set of reasons, and at the end of that letter, the creditor is required to let the consumer know what credit reporting agencies they looked at in making the lending decision. Some creditors will look at all 3, some will only look at 2, some will look at 1. But at the bottom of that letter, it will say, this information was obtained via your Experian report or your TransUnion report, and it will have instructions there as to how to obtain a copy of that credit report so that you can see what's on it and you can see exactly what information and how it was reported and how that information affected the credit decision. And it also gives you an opportunity to dispute any inaccurate information, which once again we'll get to a little bit later. And finally, many consumers don't know this, but even if you've received a copy of your reports within the last 12 months, you can still get an updated copy of your credit report on annualcreditreport.com, and it only costs a small fee. And you can go on, and if you're not eligible for a free report, it will lead you through the instructions of how to pay, and you can just enter your information there, and you can still get a copy, and you're not required to sign up for any sort of continuing credit monitoring service or anything like that. And the process for check systems, I should mention the process I was just referring to at annualcreditreport.com. I would just want to be clear that applies only to Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax reports, none other. Consumers looking to obtain a copy of their check systems report. Unfortunately, there is no online ordering system there, so there are two options. You can order by phone at the number on the slide, or you can complete a request form and you can send it in by mail or fax. The request form is available on the website consumerdebit.com, consumerinfo, that link that's at the bottom of your slide. You can just print it out and send it by fax or mail. I do recommend that anybody sending a mail request for a credit report, whether it's to annualcreditreport.com service or to check systems, do send a copy of that request by certified mail. Many times the credit reporting agencies become so flooded with requests that the requests might slip to the bottom of the pile. They might forget about it, and if you find yourself in a situation where you're unable to obtain a copy of your report after several requests, you're going to want to be able to prove that the request was made. So if you mail the form to the credit reporting agency by certified mail, you'll be able to get a copy of that green return receipt that proves that they sent it, because they have to sign that receipt when the mail arrives at their office. So the next is, now that you have a copy of your credit report, most consumers want to know what it is that they should look for. One of the biggest problems that we see consumers having is problems with identity theft. So we like to make consumers aware of certain signs of identity theft, so that, if anything looks suspicious, they may have an idea of what's going on, where it's coming from, and whether they are in fact a victim of identity theft. So one of the first and easiest ways to tell whether there's some identity theft or identity mix-up issue is looking at the accuracy of the personal information. Look at all of the addresses and telephone numbers and employers that are appearing at the top, and if there are some addresses or phone numbers that you've never had or that you're not familiar with, that don't belong to anyone in your family, then there may be evidence that somebody is using your credit information, and the same goes for employers. On the same track, the accuracy of public records. If you're seeing a lot of judgments there that you weren't aware of, there's a possibility that there might be a credit mix-up or an identity theft issue. It's also a good idea to know if there are any judgments pending against you, because occasionally consumers will overlook court documents that come in the mail and they wind up with a default judgment. So checking your credit report for that is very important, so that those situations can be resolved, and we'll get to resolving those a little bit later in the presentation. After you've checked those, it's important to take a look at the account history. You want to be looking at the payment and balance history to make sure that your payments were recorded accurately and that all of your accounts that are on time are being reflected as on time. And if you have any past due accounts, you want to make sure that the past due balance and the payment history is also accurate. I've seen some consumers that are 30 days past due, but their credit report says they're 120 days past due. So you just want to make sure that your credit report is reflecting you in the best possible light. You also want to look at your account history to make sure that all the accounts on there were in fact opened by you. If there is an account with Chase on your credit report and you've never had a Chase account, then there would certainly be reason to be suspicious of identity theft, and you'd want to conduct a dispute and get that off of your credit report, even if it isn't being reported negatively. Finally, there is a credit inquiries section, and I will show you that in just a moment, and you want to be looking at those to make sure that that's accurate as well. Now, there's two different types of credit inquiries. There's what's known as a hard pull, and there's what's known as a soft pull. A hard pull is the type of situation where you do go into a car dealership or onto a credit card website and you apply for credit. When a creditor looks at your credit report, that inquiry is going to show up, and if you apply for credit with other creditors, that inquiry is going to be visible to them. And the theory behind that is that when creditors are thinking about making loans, they want to know if there are going to be any substantial changes in your credit situation. So if you go to car dealership A and they pull your credit, and then you go to car dealership B, they're going to want to make sure that you're not getting 2 car loans and not have the ability to pay those. With respect to the soft pull is a little bit different, and that's something that is not visible to creditors when they look at your credit report. And soft pull situations would be when you look at your own credit, when an employer looks at your credit to make an employment decision, and if there are any promotional inquiries. If you'll remember, as I mentioned earlier on, credit reporting agencies' primary business is to sell consumer information to creditors. If you've ever received a pre-screened or pre-approved credit card offer in the mail, then that would be an example of a soft pull. Certain credit card companies might pay the credit reporting agency for information to make pre-approved offers and to send out promotional information. While that inquiry is not visible to creditors on your credit report, it is something that will show up to you when you do review your own copy, and that's just because you have a right to see who it is that is looking at your credit report. However, there is a federal law that specifies that any time a creditor makes a soft pull, they have to extend a firm offer of credit, and that means that they have to actually provide you with a written offer when they're looking at your credit report. So that applies to any soft pulls. So if you're seeing a soft pull on your credit report from Discover, but you never received anything in the mail from them offering you a credit card, then they may be in violation of federal law. So you want to be looking at those soft pulls and making sure that nobody's abusing your credit information by looking at it and then not actually extending you any kind of an offer. I also failed to mention that another form of soft pull is account review inquiries, and this is when your existing creditors take a look at your credit report. Just to check in, most often we'll see this in the situation with consumers that are past due. The creditors might take a look at the credit report to find out what's going on, if you're past due on any other accounts, if you've opened any new accounts, and so forth. Those types of inquiries will not show up on your credit report if you're applying for new credit, but you will be able to see them. So in that same idea, when you're looking at your credit inquiries and you see the hard pull categories, you want to make sure that you actually did apply for credit at these types of places. If you're seeing a hard pull for Joe's car dealership and you've never been there, then there's a very strong possibility that there's somebody out there that's trying to use your credit information, and you would certainly want to take action on that as soon as possible. So now that we've gone over some of the things to look for, I'm going to show you where to find them. Both TransUnion and Experian have released sample reports with reading guidelines, and I'm going to go over each of those with you this evening. Equifax, unfortunately, does not have a sample report that looks similar to what a consumer might see, so it's very difficult to provide a good reading guide to you. However, a third-party consumer assistance project has put out a YouTube video where they actually go through an Equifax report and teach you how to read it. So if you want specific information as to what's where on an Equifax report, I would suggest that you watch the YouTube video at the link that's on the slide, and I will go through the TransUnion and Experian reports tonight. Okay, so first we have our sample Experian report, and this report is very handy because it actually has fixed guidelines that you can look at. So if you want to go back and look at this some other time after the webinar, it's certainly there, and it will appear just as you see it here with the numbered guides. So as you can see on the top, the first thing to appear is your current name, the date of the report, and the report number. It is important if you're going to make a dispute to note the report number, because that's how Experian goes back in its files and takes a look at all of the different type of information that was on that report, and they can see on their end exactly how it looked. To the right of that is the index. Those are quick links if you're looking at this on an online format or in a PDF. If you click any of those links, it'll take you directly to that section, so you can kind of skip over everything else if there's something you want to look at first. Experian breaks down the credit reporting into two different categories: credit items and potentially negative items. So they're going to show you the worst first. If there's anything out there that is potentially bad, they're going to bring it to your attention right up at the front of the report. So here, this individual on the sample report has a public record against them, and this is for a civil judgment. And as you can see, the filing date, the claim amount, and the date of the resolution is all included on that report. Also, the address of the court. If the individual looking at the report wants to obtain more information, they would be able to do so. On the status details, that could really contain any number of notes about the account. Usually it will include a note as to the last update that was made to the account, just to talk about the current status of the information and how much it can be relied on. Obviously, the name of the creditor will be included as well. Here you can see the plaintiff was any commissioner, and so that name would be there. If there are any negative credit items, those will usually appear directly below a public records type of situation. As you can see on this credit report, we have a credit item in the potentially negative section, and that shows a couple of different things. So the first thing that's going to display is the name of the creditor, and that here is ABCD Banks. Below that is the address and telephone number of the creditor, and to the right of that is the account number. Now, for the consumer's security, the entire account number usually won't show. Experian, I believe, redacts the last 4 to 5 digits of the account number and will display the first few. When writing to them, it's perfectly acceptable to reference the redacted account number because that's what's showing up on your report. We'll discuss that in a little bit. Below the address and the account number will be the status, and this is the quickest way to determine what the problem with the account is. So here it says paid, but it was past due 60 days. So this is an example of a delinquent account on a credit report. This person waited beyond the 30 days to make a payment, was a little bit late, was actually 2 months late on the payment, and that's why it's something that's considered a negative account. Below that is the account details. So this is an account that was opened on October of 2012. It is an installment account, which means that it's the type of account that the consumer is going to be making monthly installment payments on. And it's also showing the reported cents, which that gives the reader an idea of how long this account has been showing up on the credit report. And then below that is the date of the status. This, like the status details that we saw above in the public records section, this gives the reader an idea of how long ago this information was updated. This says for 2012, so if we were reading this report today, which is January 2014, we might have our doubts about how current this reporting is, and it's something that we might want to look into since it hasn't been refreshed in a while. On the far right, you'll see that the credit limit and original amount original amount of the debt is displayed. The high balance, if this is a credit card with, say, a $523 limit, and the individual charged $600 on the account, then that $600 would show up here to show that the individual had actually exceeded their credit limit, which is a factor that can weigh against them in their credit score. Below that is the recent balance. So this shows a zero recent balance, which means that the account has actually been paid off. And this is a great example of showing even though an account gets paid off doesn't necessarily turn it to a positive status account. In my experience, many consumers have a tendency to believe that if they pay off their accounts, it doesn't matter anymore if they were past due. Everything's fine because the account's paid off. In fact, the creditor is entitled to continue reporting the past due status of the account for up to 7 years after the date of the incident. So this account is still considered negative even though it was paid off. Finally, at the bottom, this is the account history. So this shows the pay status. On most credit reports, this would go back several months, if not over a year. For the purposes of keeping it short, I think Experian only showed 2 months here. But as you can see, this report showed that it was 30 days past due as of November 2012, and then in December of 2012, it still wasn't paid and it went to 60 days past due. Scrolling down, this would show another type of negative account. This is Maine Collections Agency. So this would be the example of how it would appear if the debt was purchased by somebody. And as you can see, most of the information is similar to the account that we saw above, but the difference is on the far right, you'll see that the original creditor is specified. And what this means is that the person originally owed the debt to televised cable communications. Once the account came past due, they signed over the right to collect to Maine collection agencies. And this information is included because, many consumers might be looking at this report and think, geez, I've never had an account with Maine collections agencies. Who is this? So the original creditor is provided so that the consumer can take a look and, get a sense of whether or not this information is accurate. Also notable on this is a line here down on the bottom that says your statement, and that says item disputed by consumer. And this is very important. If a consumer disagrees with the reporting, they're entitled to make a dispute. And once again, we'll go through how to do that very shortly. But I just want to draw your attention to this now because if a consumer makes a dispute, the credit reporting agency is actually required to mark the item as disputed on the report. And so this is an example of how that would show up on an Experian report. Finally, on the bottom, for the account history, usually on this type of an account, the date that the account went into collection would be reported there. So afterwards, so following that, the accounts in good standing would be reported. So any account that is in good standing on an Experian report is usually showing an open, never late status. And the information otherwise that would be reported with the negative accounts is very similar. You'll see that the account number, the balance, the high balance will all be reported. There'll also be the specification as to whether it's a revolving debt like a credit card or an installment debt like an auto loan. And all of the different types of accounts would be reported that way. If I could draw your attention to the bottom of the document in the Your Statement section, if the consumer makes the decision to close an account, that would be reported on the report as well, and that would come across as account closed at consumer's request. Now, moving on, this is an example of requests for your credit history. And on Experian, they make it very simple, where they break it down into requests viewed by others and requests viewed only by you. And as we've learned, requests viewed by others is an example of a hard pull, and requests viewed only by you are the soft pulls. So for the request viewed by others, we have Home Sale Realty Company, and the date of that request was 7/16/2012. In the comments section, we'll usually give an indication as to the type of loan that was applied for. If it was applied for on behalf of a business or as an individual, that would usually also be specified there. Moving down to the request viewed only by you, these are usually the promotional requests. So we have Main Bank USA, we have their address, and we have the date of the request, and the same goes for the others. Finally, we have the personal information. As I indicated, this might indicate several different names for the same person. Some can be chalked up to typos, some can be chalked up to name changes. But each name identification has its own specific number, and that is usually for Experian's internal purposes as to coding people's identities in order to associate them with any given report. The year of birth, any spouses that the individual has or had would also be there. And as you can see on the right-hand side of that section, there's a series of addresses and the type of residence that the person lived at. Finally, you can see just below the personal information section, there is an opportunity for the consumer to make a personal statement. Most consumers don't elect to do this, but if someone is in a situation where they've been a victim of identity fraud, or they've had several disputes that have gone unresolved, they have an opportunity to make a statement here. Some consumers tend to use the opportunity to make a statement about difficult financial circumstances that they've had and how that's led to them becoming delinquent on accounts. There's really no restriction as to what can be said here. The only thing is that for most everybody, the statement has to be 100 words or less, and I believe that there's a special exception for residents of Maine where they get 200 words. And then below that, you'll see the message from Experian and the Contact Us section. Now, the Contact Us section is blank here because this is just a sample report, but usually the name and the address of Experian and where to write them would be appearing here. And just very briefly, I want to take you over to a sample TransUnion report just to give you an idea of the difference between the two. As I mentioned before, most consumer reporting agencies are gathering the same type of information about consumers, but they are presenting it in different ways. So this is a good example of a credit report where someone has also ordered their credit score. I failed to mention earlier that when you order your credit report, you're not actually entitled to a copy of your score. That's something that has to be ordered separately, and you do have the opportunity to order that when you're on annualcreditreport.com. And if you do that before you obtain a copy of your report, then usually the credit reporting agency will produce this nice report for you that includes your credit score. So as you can see here, this person has a credit score of 684, which gives them a grade of a D. And to the right of that is a chart giving, relative credit scores as to where they fall, and also where the individual ranks in relativity to the rest of the nation's population. There's some information below that regarding your personal credit score, and if you do choose to order, there will usually be a section explaining the major factors that lowered your credit score, and if you have control over these circumstances, you may be able to take steps to improve your credit score. For example, this person has a bankruptcy on their credit report, so there's not much that they can do about that. But if we look at the third item, the available credit on their open revolving credit accounts is too low. So this is an example of an individual who has maxed out the majority of their credit cards, and that they have a high balance relative to the majority of to the sum of their limits. So if this person was to pay down their credit cards and lower those balances, their credit score would likely go up. So moving on to the actual credit report, as you can see, TransUnion places all of the personal information up front. Most notably, the file number is in the top right-hand corner on a TransUnion report. Your social security number and all of your associated addresses are right up here. TransUnion doesn't specify negative versus positive account information right up front until we get down to the actual credit accounts, but any public records that are out there against you would be right up here. Usually those public records are considered negative information even though it's not stated as negative information on a TransUnion report. And if you have a mortgage that was recorded with the town that you're in, that information would appear here at the adjustable rate mortgage information. Also, I should mention, if you go back to review this credit report on your own, oops, I believe I've lost it. Please bear with me. If you go back to obtain a copy of your TransUnion report on your own, you can actually click on the sections and little explanations will pop up showing you, what the account or what the section means and how it applies to you. So moving on, before we get to the account information in a TransUnion report, they provide us with this handy key, and that shows us all of the different codes that they use and what they mean. So an X in the box means that no information is had on this account. An OK in the box means that the account's current for that given month and that it's okay. And then we have 30, 60, 90, and 120, which all indicate the number of days past due that the account is. And then we have a code for collection, a voluntary surrender, which would apply if a consumer had a vehicle or other secured collateral that they could no longer pay for. They may elect to voluntarily bring it back to the creditor. Unlike a repossession situation, which is next, that's when the lender actually physically comes and takes the collateral without the consumer surrendering it voluntarily. And a charge-off is when a creditor has written the debt off as bad debt. Usually this will apply in a situation where the creditor has sold off the debt. And then finally we have a foreclosure, which would apply to a home. So if we go down here to the adverse accounts section, the information up top is substantially similar to that on the Experian report. You have the date opened, you have the type of account, the balances. To the far right, you have the pay status. That will include the summary of exactly what it is that's wrong with the account. And if you go down to the bottom, TransUnion actually provides a pretty comprehensive payment history. So as you can see, at the top column here we have the month. So in May of 2012, this person was 120 days past due on this account. And they were also 120 days past due in April and in March and in February and in January. And they were 120 days past due well into 2010. On another account, you might see, 120 days past due in March, and then, the delinquency would kind of work backwards, and there would be different codes in those boxes. But, again, you can just reference the account information key up top if you have any questions about what exactly any information in those boxes means. Below the adverse accounts on a TransUnion account, you'll see a list of satisfactory accounts. Those are very much like the Experian report, so I'm not going to go in too much detail. One big difference in a TransUnion report is that they break their inquiries into a couple different categories. We have regular inquiries, we have promotional inquiries, and we have account review inquiries. As we discussed before, the promotional inquiries and the account review inquiries are what we call soft pulls. Those would apply, for promotional purposes or if your existing creditors are taking a look at your accounts. The regular inquiries is what we mean by a hard pull here. So if you're going to the bank and you're applying for credit, that's going to show up under the regular inquiries section. Like Experian, there's also an opportunity for the consumer to make a statement here. Again, it has to be 100 words or less unless you live in Maine. Then it's 200 or less. And then finally, you will have a set of special messages or any other information that might apply. And then there is a statement finally on the bottom of an inquiry analysis. That's going to give you a little bit more information on who was doing promotional inquiries, where they can be contacted, and the name and address that they had for you. So this is a good way to keep track of, possible instances of identity theft or identity mix-ups. First Premier Bank here had the name as Test Y Consumer with an address of 555 West Adams Street. If that isn't the consumer's address, that may be a sign that there was some sort of a mix-up or some sort of identity fraud going on when these inquiries were made. So it is a good idea to keep an eye on those as well. So I'm going to move back to the PowerPoint now. As I mentioned, the Equifax report and an instructional video can be accessed on YouTube at the link on the slide. So this brings us into instructions on what to do if you find inaccurate information on your credit report. And the first thing that you want to do is you want to dispute the item directly with the CRA, and you want to do that in writing. So making a phone call or anything else like that is not going to be helpful here. You want to make sure that you have a good written record of making the dispute. The Federal Trade Commission has provided a sample dispute letter at that address that's appearing on your slide, and that really does provide very good guidelines on how to write a dispute letter. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into great detail as to what that should entail, given the FTC's great guidelines on that. So if you do need to just write a dispute letter, I would suggest you take a look at that before writing it. Here are some tips for a credit dispute letter aside from content. You want your full name, you want your address, your social security number, the report number, which we went over earlier, as well as the account numbers relative as they were appearing on the report, and your telephone number where you could be reached. You want to make a statement of the reason why the information is inaccurate. And if you have any copies of any supporting evidence, you want to include that too. Sometimes we have consumers that, have written to the original creditor and they've made some statements. They may have received a response from the creditor saying, geez, we're sorry, this isn't your debt, but it's still showing up on the credit report. You'd want to include any copies of those letters. If you believe you're a victim of identity fraud, you've probably filed a police report. You'd want to include a copy of that police report in your dispute letter to the credit reporting agency. Once you have your dispute letter assembled, you want to send it by certified mail, return receipt requested. As we've discussed before, that allows you to have proof of when the credit reporting agency does in fact receive your dispute letter. One thing that we're seeing now that's new is that many of these credit reporting agencies have started using online dispute systems. You can actually go to a website, you can enter in a statement regarding your dispute, and you can send it in. You can also do it at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau website, and I believe also you can still do it at the Federal Trade Commission website. We don't usually recommend these just because it is difficult for consumers to establish receipt of the dispute, and it's also difficult to get copies of the dispute. A lot of times you click send and then the dispute letter kind of goes into the abyss and you're unable to print a copy for yourself unless you remember to print it before you physically send it. So just in the interest of keeping good records, it's usually better to use certified mail, print everything off the computer, and keep hard copies of it, and you'll find it much easier to prove that you've made a dispute if it becomes necessary. What happens next? Usually the credit reporting agency will respond within 30 to 60 days. Many consumers will get an acknowledgement of their dispute first saying, we've received it, we're looking into it, stay tuned for more information. But usually a full response will be received within 30 to 60 days. Once the credit reporting agency has received your dispute, they will take a look at it, and they'll look at their files, and they'll either correct the information, remove the account, or determine that the information is valid. Most times they're going to contact the original creditor that's on the credit report. They're going to discuss the account with them. They may ask the creditor to send them proof of the account or proof of the past due status. They'll take a look, and they'll make the determination by that. Once they've made that determination, they'll provide you with a response, and that will state the results as well as the reasons why they reached that result. If the CRA determines that a disputed account is valid, they are required to mark the account as disputed by the consumer. And as I showed you before, that will usually appear right at that bottom line of the account on your credit report. And I should mention before I move on that this right to dispute does apply to all the different types of credit reporting agencies. So this doesn't apply just to TransUnion or Equifax or Experian. It also applies to employment verification type of reports like ADP. It also applies to banking reports like check systems. So you do have the right to make dispute with respect to all the different types of credit reports if you find that there is inaccurate information on there. If the CRA refuses to remove inaccurate information from your credit report, you may have legal rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And again, that applies to all different kinds of CRAs. You may choose to request another reinvestigation of the account. It's not necessary, but sometimes we do advise consumers that the more evidence of disputes, the better. So the consumer might elect to send a second dispute letter, and if you do, you should attach a copy of the original dispute letter, indicating to the credit reporting agency that this is your second dispute, that you still dispute the account, and asking them to take a look at it again. If there's been any new information that's been obtained since the original dispute, such as a police report that you didn't have before, or copies of other CRA's decisions to remove the account, you should certainly include those in your letter. And once again, don't forget to use certified mail. I'd just like to close out the webinar by discussing just some of our tips for keeping a healthy credit history. We suggest that all consumers check their credit report at least once per year. As we discussed, checking your own credit doesn't harm your score because other creditors can't see the inquiry. This helps you to keep an eye out for suspicious accounts or inquiries before they get too far. So if 12 months ago I checked my credit report and I didn't see anything on there, there's a good chance that if I see a suspicious account when I check my credit report the next year, it hasn't been in existence for too long, and I'll be able to nip it in the bud before it gets too far out of control. Once again, if you want to check your credit report once every 6 months, you can do that for a small fee. You can also check your credit score for a small fee if you want to know what your numeric credit score is. And once again, that can all be done on annualcreditreport.com. Our next tip is paying your bills on time every month. It seems simple. As we've seen on the credit reports, most of the information that creditors are looking at are your payment history, and if you're paying your debts on time, that's going to make up a very substantial portion of your positive credit rating. Many credit reporting agencies report in terms of, whether an account is being reported in accordance with an agreement. So if it's not possible to pay your bills on time every month, it might be worth calling your creditor and to make other arrangements. Discuss with them your inability to pay, see if they'll accept a lesser amount, and discuss with them the possibility of keeping that off of your credit report as long as you make the agreed upon new payment. Many times we find that creditors are willing to work with consumers if they get in touch with the creditor before the payments start falling behind. The third tip is, if you can, avoid maxing out your credit cards. As we've seen, keeping a high balance is really something that's going to lower your credit score and not look so great on your report, especially if you're over your limits. And another point in that same spirit is, even if you pay your credit cards off every month, you shouldn't use the full limit or close to the full limit, because it's going to continue to show up on your credit report as a high balance every single month, and it may not necessarily indicate that that high balance was paid off every month. Our next tip is being selective about applying for credit. As we've seen, having many inquiries at once or having a lot of credit cards, even without a balance, can actually harm your score. So, evaluate every application for credit very carefully, and, think twice before applying for that pre-screened credit card offer that you receive in the mail. Finally, we advise consumers to be selective about co-signing. Many consumers are not aware of the fact that co-signers are equally responsible for the debt. So even though it's not the consumer's credit card or it's not the consumer's car loan, they can still be responsible for the debt just like the primary borrower. So we suggest that consumers only co-sign for people that they trust will pay the loan, because if that person doesn't, it's very likely that that account is going to show up negatively on the co-signer's credit report, and they may find themselves in a world of trouble with lawsuits on the debt. So if there are any questions concerning this webinar, viewers should feel free to contact me. Once again, my name is Hailey Gallant Rice. I'm with Consumer Law Group, LLC, and my email address and phone number are available on this slide. Please feel free to use them with any questions. And finally, we have our social media here for anybody wishing to connect with Consumer Law Group. We usually send out notices of our webinars via all of our social media outlets. We have our Facebook, our Twitter, our Google+, and we also make regular updates to our blog, and those just usually have some of our best tips for consumers, and we address any hot consumer issues in the news on the blog as well. So I definitely would recommend checking those out and subscribing to those feeds to get the latest updates. And I thank all of our viewers for their time this evening, and best of luck on your credit reports.